Every so often, I will see complaints about min-maxing in 5e, and those complaints have always rubbed me the wrong way. Too often, the term is used for so many player behaviours that people consider unsavoury. In fact, I feel that, as a community, we've lost sight of what min-maxing actually is. More than that, I think that min-maxing in 5th edition doesn't actually exist. Let me explain. First, we need to establish a history of the term and its use, so everyone is on the same page. Firstly, any definition of min-maxing needs to actually relate to the minimum-maximum dichotomy contained within the word. I have seen many attempts to define min-maxing as choosing a selection for your player character that is technically optimal in a metagame sense, but does not necessarily fit in a roleplay sense. This is singularly unhelpful. Often accompanying this is some suggestion that the metagame is maximised and role-playing and the narrative are minimised when making these choices, justifying it as min-maxing. An optimal choice in 5th edition has absolutely no reason to destabilise the narrative nor role-play potential of a character or a situation. In relatively unbounded storytelling, where the GM is an arbiter, a storyteller and a narrator, there is absolutely no reason why the optimal choice cannot also be the most narratively interesting. If a player makes a choice, the role of the GM is to respond to that choice, both as custodian and operator of the world and its non-playable characters, and as the master of narrative consequences. This is the case for all game decisions. Players are constantly minimising narrative jeopardy for the sake of common sense, even in meta contexts. Sending the character with the highest athletic score with a rope up a cliff to drop down the rope for everyone else is certainly the optimal choice, even over the extra trapeze artist who's being role-played by another member of the group. And yes, the tension is somewhat mitigated when the less athletic members of the party are able to climb the rope, which makes it easier for them. You cannot guarantee that any decision will minimise narrative or roleplay, even those decisions that are maximising the optimal route. So we are left definitionless once more. Let's look to the history of the game. Min-maxing has found its way as a discussion point into all sorts of RPGs, especially video games in recent years, but it got its start in tabletop RPGs, specifically in Dungeons & Dragons. In older versions of the game, a modern conception of game balance was not really developed. It wasn't on the cards. Instead, the focus of balance was to create roles for each player to fulfill on an adventuring party. This is why the earliest versions of D&D have names that are incredibly descriptive of their functionality in a team. Fighter, cleric, magic user, and thief. To play your role, you needed to inhabit the fantasy archetype and be good at your specialism. As the game progressed through history, players made decisions that made them better at fulfilling their role, becoming more competent than ever through judicious use of magic items and through bending or abusing the flimsy rules to create niche and powerful specializations. These coordinate to create an ultra specialism. The ability to maximise the one specific thing that you're supposed to be good at the cost of everything else. Role-playing itself as a term has a very tricky and amorphous history, which I won't be getting into here. But suffice it to say, it shifted in our collective understanding at some point from performing as a specified role to performing within a specified role. To clarify, you're no longer seeking the fantasy ideal of thief, but rather seeking to establish your own version of a thief within the context of the fantasy archetype. In any case, min-maxing emerges as a way to maximize your character's specific role function. From damage dealing to tanking, from controlling to healing. This reached its apex in 3rd edition and especially 3.5. Where 2nd edition came out in 1989, 3rd edition emerged in 2000. These were two very, very different gaming landscapes. By 2000, MMORPGs were on a meteoric rise, with raids and events which required teams of ultra-specialised characters working in tandem to emerge victorious. By the time 3.5 was released, classic RPG roles such as tank, damage dealer and healer were in full use across much of the gaming community. And by this point, the vast array of sourcebooks, feats and content for D&D ensured that people could build their characters more flexibly than ever before. Crucially, for our discussion, this often meant specialisation. A full understanding and abuse of 3.5e's rules can certainly break the game, but even a reasonable understanding can allow a player to maximise their efficacy in one specific area, and at a cost, minimise their effectiveness in many other regions of the game. This starts with stats, but moves through feats, feat trees, the myriad magic items on offer, and even things like monstrous player options. All of these allow a player to build a character that is niche and specialised to high heaven, and is utterly untouchable at least one aspect of the game. Here we find grapplers, lockdown specialists, area controllers, and so many more. The optimization community in 3.5 creates its own niche builds, and through sharing and discussion on forums, these builds come to be extremely powerful, shared around to demonstrate the mastery of the rules and the possibilities of min-maxing. And people play them. A lot of people try to, at very least. After all, being the best at something feels really awesome. It doesn't matter if you're not that great at anything else. You've maximised the niche of the game you're interested in, and you can crush most combats that aren't specifically designed to mitigate your build. But when a combat is designed to mitigate your specialist one-trick pony build, well, that doesn't quite feel fair. After all, you chose to sacrifice everything else, minimising your skills in other areas just to make this work. So, resentment builds. You begin to complain about the encounter design and perceived level of fairness. And everyone at the table now needs to choose between satisfying the conditions that make your character amazing, or listen to you complain incessantly. That is why min-maxing became a buzzword. It's why it's transcended its concrete meaning and become a catch-all term for seemingly obnoxious player behaviour tied to character creation and customization. Since its heyday in 3.5, it's been used to critique builds that are not roleplay focused, builds that are too specialised, or even people who refer to characters as builds. To its credit, 4th edition did try to solve a lot of these problems. People still tried to make powerful characters, but the freedom of 3.5 in comparison made 4th edition ring hollow to many optimization enthusiasts. And so we come to the present day. People seem split right down the middle between role-playing and optimization. It's worth noting that both of these terms have a really complex and thorny history, and have often been used to describe things that we would not even consider as those things today. But to our original question at last, does min-maxing make sense as a concept for 5th edition? It's meant many things, but at its core, it means the maximization of potency in one area, at the detriment of others. It's most clearly seen now in Souls-like games, where heavy armour masters, dodge rollers, and magic blasters all coexist and all require very different stat spreads and equipment to function as concepts. But in modern D&D, well, we have the point buy system, which does certainly allow you, and sometimes encourage you, to boost certain stats at the literal immediate detriment of others. It is also possible to create a specialised build, focused only on grappling in 5th edition. But due to bounded accuracy and the diversification of options within a class, it's actually quite difficult to build a character that is optimised towards one specific playstyle that isn't also accidentally good at other things. Classes have become more generalised, and the only major decision points in the game come now at your subclass selection, almost all of which provide some broad benefits that help you no matter what style you choose, and ability score increases or feats if you're using them. Multiclassing is another major decision point if you're using it, but considering the requirements of 13 in a stat to take certain classes, it's actually quite difficult to completely screw the pooch in character creation, even as a multiclassed character. In other words, while you can specialise a 5th edition character, unless you're really trying, and actually trying to make your character worse, it's very difficult not to be able to at least fall back on daggers, cantrips, bows, or sword and board at very least. The thing is, min-maxing in its traditional sense is kind of already baked in to 5th edition. It holds within it the player's handbook recommends ability scores to focus on maximising for each class in the game. If you don't have high strength or dexterity, well, it's almost guaranteed that you will have some sort of a cantrip option that scales off your highest or second highest stat, simply by the game's design, and its requirement that you have 13 in some stats before you can take a class. At this point, you can max in 5th edition, but there's no easy way to sacrifice some broad potency for dumping everything into a specific niche. The only real places that min-maxing can occur are if you have an especially lopsided point buy spread, or arguably in multiclassing, where you can sacrifice class progression or spell progression, or you can lock yourself out of your capstone abilities. Essentially, due to quality of life changes, some of which are imported over from 4th edition, 5e allows you to be at least okay in quite a few different areas. The magic user in older editions was literally just empirically worse at using any kind of weapon than their other counterparts. Now, with bounded accuracy and all classes getting at least some weapon proficiencies, a wizard is reasonably able to hit an enemy with some sort of weapon if they absolutely need to. Not that that's almost ever going to be the optimal choice. My point really is that min-maxing is a nonsense term in 5th edition. There are simply not enough momentous decision points where you can actually lose or sacrifice something, and there are too many guardrails for that 3.5e style of power gaming versus completely useless characters to rear its ugly head. Why else would optimization in 5th edition look so different from certain previous editions? We don't have puns, illithid player characters, or planar shepherd druids. Instead, we have discussions on whether Hunter's Mark is actually viable for rangers to spend spell slots on. Macro optimization, by which I mean optimization with a goal to trivialize the game's systems themselves, is not as common anymore. While in-character and in-class optimization is on the rise. Accusations of min-maxing are not terribly valid in this modern era of 5th edition, because we have a balance ethos that focuses on individual player experience, not balancing the adventure party versus the world. Sure, call someone a min-maxer all you want, but when the player's handbook explicitly recommends building your paladin with strength as their primary stat, it seems churlish to complain that your dex paladin build is not out-damaging that strength build, especially considering that you're realistically losing out on just a few points of damage per round. Due to the vast variety of monster design, not necessarily in official materials, but across the vast homebrew network of 5th edition, as well as the GM's burgeoning role as more and more of a storyteller and game balancer on their own, you're going to be put in situations where your character is weaker. But in 5e, more than any other edition of D&D, it's likely you'll be just about okay. Your lowest lows aren't quite as low as you think. So, I guess the upshot of this is, I think we should stop calling people min-maxers in 5th edition. Because you can't really min-max in 5th edition. Why do you think so many people are still playing older versions of the game? Thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting and engaging, and that I've done this very complicated topic some service. If you disagree with me, absolutely fine. Let me know in the comments and we can figure it out. But there may just be fundamental disagreements on this topic, especially as it is so contentious. Let's all be civil and acknowledge that our perspectives are not universal, and that especially with contentious issues like this, there may be valid disagreements. With that said, I'm Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master, and I will see you in the next video.